So in First Kings chapter 18, we see the story of the prophet Elijah calling out the prophets of Baal and like challenging them to see whose God is real. And Elijah knew all along that like the God that he worships, the God that we worship, God the Father, is real, and that the prophets, they were worshiping a false God, but he wanted to prove to them that their God was false. And I think it's so crazy, like how these prophets were really convinced that their God was real, like to the point where they accepted Elijah's challenge to see if their God would answer by fire, because that was a challenge. Like we'll sacrifice a bull, and we'll see whose God answers by fire to consume the offering. And they really went through with like, okay, yeah, we'll do it. So like they're preparing the bull, and they're like really thinking that this thing is gonna work, even though I have a feeling that they knew that their God wasn't real. Like I have a feeling that there's just no way, because like we as Christians, we should have a testimony of God. Not because we don't believe in God just because, someone else told us to believe in God. We I will, if that's the case, I would encourage you to seek your own testimony. But for most Christians, or most people that I know as Christians, they have a testimony about how God has answered a prayer, how God has revealed himself to them. And through that experience, their faith either deepens or begins, or is birthed. And so for me, it's really hard for me to imagine that these prophets of Baal had any real experience with their God, that they'd be like, yeah, Baal is real because X, Y, and Z. Whether, in all reality, I think that the truth really is that they just believed in Baal because of fear, because of Jezebel at the time, who like made these people worship Baal. And so like the fact that they're going through with all these fake rituals, knowing that they don't really have a testimony of their God, is insane to me. It's just straight up delusion. And a lot of that delusion applies to people's lives today, when you seek other vices and you think that these things are like idolatry is one of the main things that we're getting at in First Kings chapter 18. Like they worship the false god, so that is idolatry. And a lot of things that people chase today, whether it be money, you don't have a testimony about money. Money may like make your life easier in some ways, and you may, experience a comfort and an ease from it, but it can't save you, right? Money doesn't have a soul, it doesn't have morals, it doesn't have this power in and of itself. It only has power when it gets into your hands, right? And so I feel like these things we put as idols, knowing in all reality that it can't save us, or we become convinced through delusion that these things are greater than God, or these things can, that we replace God with these things because we feel like they can fill these voids in our lives, in our souls. But they really, we end up looking like the prophets of Baal, where they're like, they literally cut themselves. Their blood was gushing onto each other because they were trying to get the attention of their fake God. And that's how we look when we try to seek other things, and we try to replace God by idolatry, or by other vices, by other means. By, we talked about in my last video, healing and what healing looks like. And healing looks like giving this thing to God and asking God to deal with these wounds, instead of us trying to self-medicate with band-aids. Band-aids, also known as things that are temporary reliefs, like alcohol, etc. You fill in the blank for what that how that applies to you in your life. But the end of the bottom line is that none of these things can truly fill the voids in our hearts, and we end up looking like these prophets, not necessarily physically cutting ourselves to get the attention of a fake god, but we exert time, we exert energy, we like waste time and energy when we're calling and we're turning to things that can't ever fulfill that void in our hearts. These prophets, they did their rituals, and their God never answered them. And when Elijah called on God to consume the offering with fire from heaven, God answered. And we see the contrast here when we call on God the Father, when we call on Jesus to enter into our circumstances, enter into our lives, and fix the broken areas. He answers. He does not just let us sit by and ignore us. He answers, and I think that's one of the greatest differences of this text is just how great God is, because He answers us. He didn't leave Elijah. He's like, no, I don't feel like doing this miracle. He's like, no, okay, you want me to prove myself to these people, show myself to these people, so that they would know that I'm God? Here I am. And he consumed the offering. And everyone knew at that moment that Elijah's God was God. And that is also the testimony of our lives as well. When we turn to Christ with our difficulties and our wounds, and he begins to heal it, and we have a testimony, that testimony doesn't just live with us. Other people experience God and Christ through us, through our transformation, through our renewal, through our healing. We get to introduce other people to Christ. And that's really how we advance the kingdom, by being a part of it, experiencing it, and letting God transform us. And then other people see that as well. That's exactly what's happening here right now. Like, I have a testimony of Christ, of how he healed me in areas of my life. And here I am trying to share this testimony and this truth with other people. And hopefully you will find this truth and application in your life. You'll find healing in your life, and so on and so forth. But the one most important thing is that we're calling on God. We're turning to Christ, and he is answering us, and he is capable of healing us and delivering us. He's not like these false gods where we have to do these rituals, and then we try to seek relief and the seek these things to fill the voids that only Christ can fill in our lives, because we'll come up empty. We'll be ignored by these false gods. And I say false gods, but I really don't want us to think of us like erecting statues and us worshiping them. But when you turn to something else that isn't Christ to seek relief and to find a way out of this pain, that is something that can so easily become an idol. So I pray that you would meditate upon that, and that you would turn to Christ and find your healing and restoration and all that he wants to do in your life. Stay encouraged and be blessed. Peace.